My stepmother lifted her wine glass and said, "That's all someone like you deserves, Morgan." Her voice cut through the classical music playing in the background, and half the room chuckled nervously. My dad just gave her that adoring look, like she'd made some clever joke. I sat there, gripping my napkin, the flash drive burning in my jacket pocket. They had absolutely no clue what I'd discovered or what I was planning to do with it. One piece of evidence powerful enough to tear down everything they'd carefully constructed. Before I dive in, let me ask you something. Have you ever kept your mouth shut just to avoid the drama? Even when speaking up could change everything. Sometimes silence feels safer than the explosion that comes with truth. They say every family has skeletons in the closet. Mine didn't even bother with the closet. They just hung them in the living room and called it family tradition. My father, Richard Coleman, started his real estate development firm with nothing but ambition and a loan from my late grandfather. In his universe, appearances were currency. The house in Greenwich, Connecticut had to be perfect. The dinner parties had to be flawless. Even our smiles had to look genuine in photos. My stepmother, Diane, was his trophy wife. She had this talent for making insults sound like compliments wrapped in silk. And then there was Brittany, her daughter from her first marriage, the golden child my father never had. I used to count how many times he mentioned her name during meals, like I was keeping score of my own irrelevance. I spent my childhood in that estate, surrounded by crystal chandeliers and cold shoulders. After Mom died from breast cancer when I was 9, everything shifted. Diane appeared within 4 months, her Chanel No. 5 replacing the lavender sachets Mom used to keep in her dresser. The housekeepers caught on fast. Compliment Diane, keep your paycheck. I learned the same lesson. Keep quiet. Stay invisible. Make yourself small enough to slip through the cracks. Every Christmas card showed me at the edge of the frame, half smiling, half present, half forgotten. The only thing that felt authentic in my world was my camera. At 17, I bought a Canon Rebel with money I'd saved from babysitting kids in the neighborhood. It wasn't about becoming an artist back then. It was survival, pure and simple. Through that viewfinder, I could reshape reality. I could focus on details everyone else overlooked, a homeless veteran feeding pigeons in Central Park, a waitress's exhausted eyes at the end of a double shift, rain pooling in the cracks of broken pavement. The kind of truth that doesn't get applause at country club brunches, but it's real. It matters. When I left for college at 19, nobody tried to stop me. Diane organized this polite going-away brunch like she was sending off a distant cousin, not someone who'd lived under the same roof for a decade. Dad wrote me a check for $10,000 and said, "Call if you need anything, sweetheart." I never called. Not once. The years blurred together after that. I built a career as a documentary filmmaker, telling other people's stories. Families losing their farms to corporate developers. Immigrants rebuilding their lives from scratch. Single mothers working 3 jobs to keep the lights on. Real people with real struggles. But every single time I powered down my equipment and packed up, this gnawing feeling came back, the whisper that I'd never turned the camera on my own life. I'd documented everyone else's pain but ignored my own. Then one random Tuesday in February, an email landed in my inbox. "You are cordially invited to Richard Coleman's 65th birthday celebration. Black tie required." No personal message. No "we miss you" or "hope you can make it." Just formal invitation language, like I was a business associate instead of his daughter. For 64 seconds, I stared at those words on my laptop screen. Most people would have deleted it without a second thought. I didn't. Because when you've spent your whole life being erased, you start craving evidence that you still exist in someone's memory. That invitation felt like proof, even if it was just a line on a guest list. As the party date approached, sleep became impossible. My studio apartment in Brooklyn felt smaller every night, cluttered with equipment cases and the constant hum of hard drives backing up footage. I kept telling myself I was just going to film some atmospheric shots for a new project about family dynamics. But we both knew that was complete nonsense. I was going to document the truth, whatever that looked like. Then my friend Jenna showed up one evening. She burst through my door with paint-stained jeans and her sketchbook tucked under her arm, smelling like turpentine and coffee. She collapsed onto my second-hand couch and said, "You're not going to believe what I overheard today." I was editing footage, not really paying attention at first. But her tone had this edge that made my stomach clench. "Brittany was at that coffee shop on Flatbush Avenue," Jenna continued. "She was talking to some guy, I think she called him Derek, and she said, "Dad won't suspect anything once the paperwork goes through." My hands froze on the keyboard. "What paperwork?" Jenna shrugged, pulling out her phone. Sounded like business stuff, but I saw her screen when she leaned back. It had your dad's company logo. Coleman Development Group. We stayed up until 3 a.m, digging through digital breadcrumbs. Jenna remembered that she and Brittany had shared a cloud storage account years ago for a freelance graphic design project. Same password, Brittany never changed anything. Inside that account, we found scanned legal documents, email threads, and a draft asset transfer agreement. Diane and Brittany were systematically moving Dad's company shares into Brittany's name, using Derek, some finance guy Diane was apparently seeing on the side, as their silent partner. The emails were worse than the documents. "Dad will be grateful once he realizes I saved the company from his sentimental decisions." That was Brittany. And Diane, "Morgan will stay out of it. She always does. She's too busy with her little passion projects to notice what's happening in the real world." Reading those words felt like swallowing broken glass. This wasn't just greed. This was confirmation of every unspoken rule I'd grown up with. Diane always wins. Brittany always shines. Morgan always disappears. Jenna watched me carefully. "You could destroy them with this," she said quietly. I nodded, but I couldn't speak. I could already picture Dad's face if I exposed this, confused, humiliated, maybe even broken. And despite everything, despite years of neglect and dismissal, I still cared. I hated that I cared, but I did. I downloaded everything onto a small flash drive. When I closed the cap, it made this soft clicking sound, like a lock engaging. I held it in my palm until my skin grew warm. This was my truth. My ammunition. My confession. When Jenna finally left around dawn, she squeezed my shoulder. "So what's the plan?" I stared out at the Brooklyn skyline, lights blurring through my exhausted eyes. "I'm going home," I said. "But this time, I'm not going as their forgotten daughter." The morning of Dad's party, Connecticut was wrapped in that particular gray light that makes everything look like an old photograph. I packed methodically, camera equipment first, then the flash drive, then the black Diane von Furstenberg dress that felt more like armor than clothing. The silence in my apartment pressed down on me, heavy with anticipation. I whispered to myself, "No more filming other people's truths," and zipped the suitcase shut. The drive up I-95 felt like traveling backward through time. Same highway exits I'd memorized as a teenager. Same towering oak trees lining the property. Same iron gates that used to groan open like they were issuing a warning. But the estate looked different now, smaller somehow, stripped of the power it once held over me. I parked near the garage where I used to wait for Dad to come home from work, hoping he'd ask about my day. He never did. The November wind was sharp, carrying the scent of expensive flowers and old money. Inside, the house sparkled. String lights everywhere, white tablecloths, champagne already flowing even though it was only 4 in the afternoon. Diane's voice carried across the foyer, warm, fake, practiced for maximum impact. She wore a cream-colored Chanel suit and diamonds that probably cost more than most people's cars. She smiled like she owned not just the house but the air inside it. Brittany followed her around in a rose-gold cocktail dress, every movement calculated for attention. When I appeared in the doorway, Diane's eyes flickered over me like I was a typo in her perfect script. "Morgan," she said, her voice sweet but stretched tight as wire. "You actually came." "You invited me," I replied evenly. "I suppose we did," she murmured, already looking past me toward more important guests. "Try not to create any awkwardness tonight, dear." Her words landed like ice water, but I didn't flinch. I'd been frozen before. I knew how to thaw. Dad appeared moments later, looking distinguished in his charcoal Tom Ford suit. "Morgan," he said, sounding genuinely surprised but careful. "Glad you could make it, sweetheart." "Wouldn't miss it," I said. He smiled politely and immediately got pulled into a conversation with one of his business partners. That tiny moment, his casual dismissal wrapped in charm, was the crack that let all my buried anger come flooding through. I stayed quiet through the speeches, through the toasts, through Diane's flawless performance as the devoted wife. But every time she touched his arm, every time Brittany laughed too loudly at his jokes, I felt the flash drive in my clutch growing heavier. When people started dancing to the jazz quartet in the ballroom, I slipped down the hallway toward his study. The family portraits watched me like silent witnesses as I opened the door and placed the flash drive on his mahogany desk, right next to his engraved nameplate. For the first time in years, my hands weren't shaking. He found me standing there minutes later, like a ghost in my own history. The laughter from the party echoed distantly, muffled by expensive wallpaper and closed doors. When Dad saw me, he stopped in the doorway, one hand still gripping the frame. "Morgan," he said softly, like my name was fragile. "Diane mentioned you'd stepped away. You really shouldn't be in here." "I know," I said. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. "I just needed somewhere quiet." He hesitated, then stepped inside and closed the door. The desk lamp cast shadows across his face, the same face I used to study as a child, trying to memorize every detail, hoping that would make him love me more. He looked older now, tired in a way that expensive suits couldn't hide. "You look so much like your mother," he said quietly. "She used to stand in this room the exact same way, like she was searching for something she couldn't name." I let those words hang in the air. I wanted to tell him that what Mom had been searching for was him, his attention, his presence, his love. But I didn't. Instead, I slid the flash drive across the desk toward him. He frowned, picking it up. "What's this?" "The truth," I said. "You should see it before someone else does." His expression shifted, confusion first, then irritation. The automatic reflex of a man who's used to being in control. "What are you talking about, Morgan?" "Just watch it," I said. "Please." He sat down in his leather chair, muttering something I couldn't hear, and plugged the drive into his laptop. The screen lit up. A video file opened, all the evidence Jenna and I had compiled, edited into a clear narrative. Diane's voice filled the study first, calm and confident. "Once the transfer's approved, Richard won't notice until it's already done." Then Brittany, laughing, "He'll probably thank us. Dad loves thinking he made the smart decision." Derek's voice came next. "You're absolutely certain nobody else has access to these files?" Diane again, smooth as silk. "Just us. Morgan doesn't even know where the company keeps its financial records. She's too busy chasing sob stories with that camera of hers." I didn't look at Dad's face. I watched the reflection of the screen in his reading glasses, the exact moment recognition hit him. The way his jaw tightened. The illusion shattering in real time. When the recording ended, only silence remained, broken by faint music seeping through the walls. He sat completely still, then whispered, "My God." I took a breath. "You always told me the truth matters. That integrity is everything. But you never asked if that applied to your own family." His hand trembled slightly on the mouse. "You could have humiliated us tonight," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "Why didn't you?" "Because I wasn't trying to destroy you," I said. "I just wanted you to finally see me." He looked up then, really looked at me, and it felt like learning a new language together. Slowly, uncertainly, he reached across the desk and placed his hand over mine. The gesture was clumsy, unpracticed, but it was the most genuine thing he'd done in a decade. "I see you now," he said. Something inside me, something tight and ancient and painful, broke open. Not in agony, but in release. We stood there for a long moment, the weight of 20 years of silence pressing down on us. Then quietly, he closed the laptop, picked up the flash drive, and said, "Stay close to me." When he left the study, I followed a few steps behind, just far enough to remain unseen. He walked through the corridor with new purpose, his footsteps steady and deliberate. The music faltered when he entered the ballroom. He didn't raise his voice, but his presence commanded every eye in the room. "Diane," he said, his tone calm but sharp as a blade. She turned, her practiced smile already in place. "Darling, is everything all right?" "Not yet," he said. The smile flickered. "What's wrong?" He held up the flash drive between two fingers. "You tell me." Confusion crossed her face first, then something else, recognition, then genuine fear. Her knuckles whitened around her champagne flute. "Richard, what is this supposed to mean?" "I watched it," he said clearly. "Every word. Every email. Every document." Brittany's confident expression cracked like thin ice. "Dad." He cut her off. "Don't." His voice wasn't loud, but it carried across the suddenly silent room. You treated my trust like a commodity you could trade. Both of you. Diane started to speak again, her voice turning syrupy sweet. Richard, please. She's manipulating you. Morgan has always been dramatic. He pointed toward where I stood at the edge of the crowd. She's my daughter. And she just saved what's left of this family. The silence that followed was devastating. Diane's face drained of color. Brittany's eyes filled with tears, but they looked more like panic than remorse. Then came the final blow. Dad reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out 2 manila envelopes, and set them on the gift table beside the untouched birthday cake. One contains divorce papers, he said. The other is your formal removal from the company board, Brittany. You'll both need to find somewhere else to live. Diane's voice cracked. You're choosing her over your own family. He shook his head. I'm choosing honesty. I should have done it years ago. I didn't move. Didn't gloat. I just watched as the empire they'd built on deception collapsed inward like a house of cards. The guests shifted uncomfortably, pretending to examine their drinks, unsure whether to stay or make excuses to leave. Diane's eyes found mine across the room, sharp, desperate, pleading. The same eyes that used to make me feel worthless. But not anymore. Not ever again. Dad turned toward the door. Morgan, he said firmly. Let's go. And that was it. No dramatics. No screaming. Just quiet devastation. Outside, the night air hit like a shock, cold and clean and real. We walked across the gravel driveway together, his footsteps slower now, more thoughtful. For the first time in my memory, the silence between us didn't hurt. Halfway to my car, he stopped and said softly, I used to think protecting people from painful truths was the same as love. He paused, looking up at the star-filled sky. Turns out I was just avoiding reality. I didn't respond. There was nothing to add. We drove away from the estate in separate cars, but somehow together. Behind us, the mansion lights blurred into the distance, a glittering lie fading into darkness. For the first time in years, I felt lighter. Justice didn't roar that night. It whispered. It walked quietly beside me into the dark, hand in hand with peace I didn't know I could feel. For months passed before I saw him again. The Greenwich estate had been sold discreetly. No announcements, no goodbye parties, just an empty driveway and a real estate sign swaying in the March wind. Dad rented a cottage in Mystic, right on the water, far from the noise and performance. The mornings there smelled like salt air and coffee. The only sounds were seagulls and waves against the dock. When I arrived, he was on the deck in jeans and an old Yale sweatshirt, no suit in sight. You found it, he said. I followed the silence, I replied. That made him smile, soft and unguarded. We didn't talk about Diane or Brittany. We didn't need to. The quiet between us had transformed. It wasn't built on fear anymore. It was built on something new, maybe not quite trust yet, but the beginning of it. He poured me coffee and we sat watching the light change across Long Island Sound. The same man who used to measure life by quarterly reports now watched sailboats drift by like it was enough. A few weeks later, he called to tell me he'd watched my latest documentary, the one about daughters who grew up invisible, who found their voices too late and used them anyway. It hurt to watch, he admitted. But I'm proud of you. You had courage I never had. That night, I stood on my Brooklyn balcony watching the city lights and felt something inside me finally release. The frost that had followed me for decades was melting. I kept filming. Stories of women like me. Stories of quiet revolutions. My first feature-length documentary premiered at the Tribeca Film Festival. When the credits rolled, the audience stood and applauded. I spotted Dad in the back row, wiping his eyes. For years, I'd chased a kind of love that demanded silence. Now I knew better. Real love listens, even when the truth is painful. I used to think revenge meant fire, something loud and destructive and final. But standing there after the screening, watching strangers embrace and whisper their own stories to each other, I realized revenge could look like light instead. Quiet. Steady. Unapologetic. That night, I packed my camera bag for the next project. The same bag that once carried evidence of betrayal now held stories waiting to be told. I glanced at the flash drive on my bookshelf, the metal dulled from handling. I didn't keep it as a weapon anymore. I kept it as a reminder, truth doesn't need to scream. It just needs to survive. Before I turned off the lights, My phone buzzed. A text from Dad: "Proud of you, kid. Don't ever dim your light for anyone." I smiled, slipped the phone into my pocket, and whispered to my quiet apartment, "Never again." Because that's the real ending, isn't it? Not watching someone else's empire crumble, but the moment you stop making yourself smaller to fit inside it. If you've ever had to walk away from people who refuse to see you, you're not alone. Your story matters too.